Hi everyone, I'm Jessie Serfilippi from Schuyler Mansion State Historic Site. Joining us is Lavada Nahon, interpreter of African American history with New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. Some of you watching today might have had the opportunity to experience one of Lavada's interpretive programs at other sites, including Phillipsburg Manor or even just across the river at our sister site, Pralo. Today, we're excited to talk with her about freedom seekers and self-manumission in 18th and early 19th century New York. Lavada, thank you so much for being with us today. As we've discussed in the past, the Schuyler family enslaved dozens of men, women, and children of African descent over the course of Philip Schuyler's lifetime. In that span, we know of at least 4, possibly 5 people who attempted to escape enslavement by the Schuylers. This includes 4 men, Har, Klaus, Adam, and possibly Scipio, as well as a woman named Diana. Well, we have talked about their experiences in an article that will be linked in the description of this video. In your research, you found a lot of information about other freedom seekers in New York in that time. Could you share with us some of what you found and help us put the experiences of these individuals into the context of the region and time period?
Thank you, Jessie. It will be my pleasure, and I want to thank all of you joining us today. Self-emancipation, emancipation, freedom. We think in terms, particularly here in New York, about the Underground Railroad a lot. And when most people envision that, they really are looking closer to the Civil War when the train was actually in play. But when we look at the time period starting, say, 1765, late to mid 18th century, going to early 19th century, what we really have is people taking a huge chance. Not that others did not, but a lot of their travels and things are on foot or on boats. And so we're just going to do a little bit of imagining what that would have been like. First of all, we have a very integrated environment. And one of the things that the runaway ads often allow us to see are identity markers. People have a vision of what the Black population looked like then. And they often think of it very different than what we have now. But in the description, you have people of dark skin, you have people who are described as yellow. We have a variety of languages, even just looking at sources coming out of the New York Gazette. We have people described as Spanish Negro. So we know that they're speaking Dutch, they're speaking Spanish, they're speaking English, they're speaking French. It depends on who their enslavers were, what type of households they grew up with, and also the skill sets that they had. One thing that we know is that there's a lot of information getting to the population about the British offer for freedom in exchange for them fighting for them. This is also a time where some of the colonies above us are lessening their rule around enslavement, and Canada is slowly starting to open up. So there are places for them to go. Prior to this, when enslavement was really all the way through Canada, through the upper northern states, people had a really hard time escaping because where would they go? You have to basically be hiding in plain sight. Now going towards Manhattan, that's British control, gives them an opportunity to consider leaving. And I am very impressed that Diana, a woman, is taking that chance. It is about leaving family, it is about leaving children. We know that there is physical abuse, but then she's also opening herself up to additional rape being out there. We don't know if she's with someone. We know that she's captured, she's in prison. We don't know what happens to her afterwards. So there's all of these issues that come into play. And even looking at Adam, who is listed later in the Book of Negroes in Nova Scotia, this man was 80 years old when he was listed. The physical condition of enslavement had to have been hard on his body, but the desire and the need for freedom is that much greater that he's willing to take that chance. We also have to look at the time of year that they left. You know, the Hudson River, the Mohawk River are basically highways of boatmen going up and down. Many of those boatmen are enslaved Africans or people of African descent. But if you don't have the opportunity to get on one of those boats, traversing New York means that you are really in a lot of very heavily wooded spaces mixed with miles and miles of open fields. The Hudson River Valley between Albany going into New York has been the breadbasket for not only New York, but also the Caribbean and parts of Europe. We've been exporting wheat by the tons. Well, for those crops, then you're clearing a lot of acreage. So to be able to walk through those fields and to get from one place to another and not be seen speaks well. And in those wooded areas, you know, we have acres and acres that are saved as woodlots. We have all those natural predators, right? We've got deer, but we also have black bear. We've got, you know, different kinds of wildcats. You know, we have this population that they have to go through. What time of year are they leaving? What is the weather doing? Is it raining? Is it cold? So they have to have such a deep level of perseverance because even on a day like today, when I left this morning, you know, half awake walking my dog, it was 10 degrees outside, right? And I'm in my modern thermals and all my thick wool. And that's one of the things, like the clothes that they're wearing, we look at those ads and they tell us what they're wearing. That is both for identification, but sometimes they have on multiple layers because they could be leaving in the winter. They could be leaving in the fall and it's cold, you know. So if they're going towards Manhattan, it may warm up, but if they're going towards Canada, if they're going towards Connecticut, particularly if you're coming out of the mid-river valley, then you have to go through all of these trails, all of these mountain passes. And those are the things that we don't consider. You know, we want to have this glorious look at that, oh, it's so easy, you know, they just get on the train and go. And that is so not the case. And then who do you trust? You know, will another enslaved person put themselves at risk to help you? You know, because, you know, we're going into the time of the fugitive slave laws. We're not quite there yet, but that awareness is always there. And they are someone's property, and there's always a reward on the other end of that return.
Yes, so speaking of, I guess, the environment that they would have to go through to get to, say, if we're in the Revolutionary War, looking at Adam going from Albany down, we think to British lines, maybe in New York City. Do you know what that journey would be like, how he would approach the British, what he may have done? Because that's something we've speculated about, but we don't really have an answer as to what happens once he gets there.
Well, we'll never know for sure how people travel, but just let's just look at what we do know, right? We know that the Hudson River is the major gateway. It is, you know, if you look at illustrations of the time, the river is packed with boats, all different kind, depending on the time of year he left. If he left in the winter and the Hudson was frozen, he then is going to have to travel more on land because then we know you do have some boats with sleds, but that's when people are, you know, that's where the wealthy are traveling and their slaves and things. So that kind of limits that. So he's going to be on land. Between here and between Albany and New York City, we have even now a series of state parks. So, you know, you're having to go through the Catskills. You're having to go into you know, what will become the Appalachian Trail. We have Harriman State Park, Sterling State Park, Bear Mountain State Park. So that all of that elevation going down if he has to travel by land. If he's going along the waterway, even parallel, he's weaving in and out. Again, we know that planting was almost right up to the riverbanks in some places. So you have these open miles of fields. And then also just the terrain itself that you have to work your way through. When you get to Manhattan, what do? Well, we know it is British held. Basically, by the time you get to Phillipsburg Manor, you're pretty much in British territory. So that is the borderline at Croton Point, because the Van Cortlands are patriots. Across the way, the Phillips are loyalists, but you have those two large manors back to back. I would think that he's going to approach someone who is of African descent. At that point, we do know that there are enslaved Africans on the tenant farms through that area. Some of the tenant farms have been abandoned, but many have not. We know that once the war starts, the Van Cortlandt family do relocate, but they leave a couple of enslaved women at the house. So there are enslaved there to help them. And then, as I said, the tenant farmers, that's one of the big misconceptions because people don't see the plantations here. They forget within the manorial system, the land is broken into small farms, and we can document enslaved Africans on those farms, enslaved people of African descent on those farms. So that's an opportunity for someone to help you as well, that buffer zone. And then as you get into Phillips Manor lands, you're into the loyalists. When you hit Manhattan, I'm sure, speak to the first Black person you know, because there are no patriots in the city by that point. So then they would take you to whomever you would need to, or assist you to get to whomever you would need to register and sign up and be able to make that boat when it actually does happen. And they take the enslaved who have joined them and have fought much against George Washington's desire. And actually, it's not even desire. They really fought to get those enslaved back, and the British refused. And so that way we have the boat going up to Nova Scotia, which is very interesting because you're taking people from a sort of cold climate into an even colder climate. And we do know that many then went to Nova Scotia, in fact, hopped on boats and went elsewhere because of the deep cold, but at least they were free at that point. But it is not as easy. I mean, and that to me speaks of a depth of character, perseverance, and a depth of ownership of self. They know they are not beneath those who enslaved them. They know they are human beings, even if they are treated as property. Sorry about that. So that in itself, how can we not honor them and admire them for that? Because they know it is their life. It is common if someone is caught that they are often sold. And to sell, we must remember that many of the families here are connected to sugar plantations in the islands. Many of these families have long-held family connections with those plantations. Many of them, like the Phillips family, owned a sugar plantation in Barbados. So being able to sell enslaved there is very common. We also forget that there are many of the families that are enslaved are also slave traders, right? So that whole market back and forth, at this point, there is still the buying and selling of people. Somebody could go off and fight a war, fight a battle, and 2 days later, they're at a slave auction. That is not uncommon. So we just have to remember that there is serious consequences if they are caught.
Absolutely.
Above and beyond physical beating, the reality that their lives could be drastically changed for the worse.
Absolutely. And I guess I always think of Diana because we don't know much about her, but we do know one really key piece of information. And I thought of this when you're talking about the tenant farmers in particular. Diana is noted as they say, being harbored by a Scotsman, and we don't know what that means. We do know he lived near Armory's farm. We don't know if that's on Schuyler's property, but later documentation from about the 1830s from Schuyler descendants seems to indicate that it is. So maybe this man was one of Schuyler's tenant farmers. And something that we found in our own research is seeing both free and enslaved people of African descent marrying into the Scottish community. So I was wondering if you've come across anything like that in your research, and what I know we don't know the situation Diana was in this particular instance, but have you seen anything where with the tenant farmers, I guess, if you could speak to that a bit more.
I have not done much research on that area particularly, but one of the things that we do know is that there are interracial relationships. We get the lightening of color that is noted in the ads, both from the raping of enslaved women by their enslavers or other men. But there were times when it was a relationship by choice. And we do know that we have records of people being intermarried, and because they see each other. You know, one of the things that in our broadening the historic narrative we tell and in our embracing as the new initiative by the governor, our whole history, right? We've been trying to do that for a lot of years. Let's put everybody in play. You have people coming in and out of these houses. If they're someone's tenant, that means several times a year they're at that estate. You know, they've got to pay their bills, they're going to shopping, you know, you see people. So having someone be there for you or care for you is part of that reality. And also, that relationship could have started because who knows what condition she was in by the time she even got to his farm. This, you know, we can imagine that's one of the things that allows us to do, and sometimes we're going to have to start doing. What if she did escape? What kind of condition was she in when she left? What kind of condition would she have gotten in by the time she got to his farm? This man could have like walked out to go plow his field one day, and there is a Black woman laid face down on the ground. As a human, is he going to ignore her, or is he going to help her? You know, so we have the ability to say, well, sometimes it was both ways, because we know people did find people, come across those enslaved, and immediately turn them in for the reward. And we know others may have been in a position where, because this really is the beginning stages of the Underground Railroad, they don't agree with the concept of enslavement. They see another person as a person, human to human, and they're going to help them move on, right? So the question then, who saw her there? How did she get discovered there? You know, did somebody happen to stop by and see her and then see this description? Because the descriptions are in the newspaper and people read the newspapers. You know, we've gotten away from that today, but that was how you, and then at dinner, at tea, at conversation, you shared what you read. And so that's that spread of mouth. And that's not only within the European community, but it is still even within the enslaved community. If a boatman, I mean, we forget the servants, the enslaved are in the rooms where these conversations are being held. So the enslaved will hear them talking about the British taking on enslaved people and then offering them their freedom. That's part of the conversation, but they forgot that their own enslaved is standing in the room getting ready to serve them. So they're going to take that information back to the community. We know that we have people traveling back and forth, doing the biddings of their enslaved. So they're going to share those conversations. And so that information is going to spread. Word of mouth is how things spread. And this spreads very quickly on all levels of the community. So this opportunity for those cross-cultural contacts do happen. Not everyone as deep and involved as enslavement was here in New York. Not everyone was into the process or into the institution. And the other thing we also have to look at on the other side of that is, as abolition comes into play, just because someone wanted them free does not mean that they wanted them to stay here. This is also the beginning of the colonization movement. So yes, we will work for your freedom, but you know, once you're free, we want you all out of here. So we have this period as we go into the Revolutionary War, go through the Revolutionary War, go into the 19th century. We're getting gradual manumission laws in New York. That is all part of the process. all of those mindsets and thoughts are starting to evolve and happen at the same time, particularly after the war. Are we going to keep this up? Is it really worth it? What have we lost because of it? And what do we see our way for going towards the future?
Absolutely. And I guess because we've kind of talked a bit about the end of the war, just to wrap things up, in 1799, with the passage of gradual manumission in New York State in particular, is there anything you could add to that and how it affected families in particular?
It does affect family because one of the things that people don't realize that between the two manumission laws, the not everyone is freed, right? Because of the way the birthdays felt. Legal enslavement will end in New York at 1827, but that does not mean that everyone who is enslaved, then called indentured servants, right, are freed. So everyone wants to have this really wonderful balloon. Oh, this was the end. No, it wasn't. The last person in New York was not let go until 1848. And that's very close to the Civil War, much closer than a lot of people think. Because legally they're not classified as slaves anymore. They are moved over to indentured servants. But really, what is a word change? They still have no property, they still have no control over their lives, they still have to serve. So there is this, all of this is coming into play. It is about New York also starting to look at, well, what is going to be our cash culture? How do we change this? What is our revenue stream? Who's going to do that labor for us? It's particularly as we end the war, the wheat crop starts to move to central New York up into western New York. This is a period of the immigrants starting to come in at this point too. So we're going to slowly have this whitening up of society as people still are angry and want their property and want that labor. We will go into several years of real war, real war. How are we going to treat people? You know, you have African American church services interrupted, you have people attacked on the street, you have people stolen. So it is not a smooth transition. It will be a long time before that smooths out. And in all honesty, I don't think it has yet.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today. Is there anything you want to add before we go, or?
I would just encourage people to take a look at some of the runaway ads. Go delve into the historic newspapers and some of the resources that are online. Look at the variety of people that are in New York, coming through New York. You would be very surprised.
And I can link some of those sites below. So anyone watching, just go in our description. You can take a look at some of the ads that Lavada's been referencing throughout the video. Thank you so much for joining us, Lavada. And
Thank you for having me.
thank you. Thank you everyone who's watching. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Thank you.